The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft golden light on the river that separated our village from the foreign lands beyond. I stood at the edge of the bank, my feet bare in the cool water, watching the ripples distort the reflection of the trees overhead. My hands were calloused, my skin tanned from years of working the land, years of survival. I was just a boy of 14, orphaned for 5 years now. I'd been left with nothing but a family-sized hole and the harsh, unforgiving world that had already taken everything from me. It wasn't the kind of thing you ever get used to. But over time, I'd learned to bury it, to push it deep down where no one could see it, where it wouldn't be able to hurt me. But that day, as I stood there at the river's edge, feeling the water wash away the dust of the day, I never could have predicted how a simple act of kindness would change everything. How it would connect me to a people I had been taught to fear, and to one woman who would forever alter my destiny. The wind carried the smell of wet earth, the heavy scent of the forest just beyond the riverbank. I could hear the soft rustle of leaves in the trees, the hum of insects in the air, and the distant call of birds returning to their nests. But then, through all the sounds of nature, there was one I hadn't expected to hear, a sound I would come to recognize as the turning point in my life. "Help me," came a voice, raspy but deep. I turned, my heart racing. The voice came from the boulder by the river's edge. It was then I saw him, a figure hunched over, one leg extended awkwardly, his face etched with pain. His skin was an unusual shade of blue, his eyes amber and tired, almost as if they had seen too much in their long life. The old alien had a staff lying across his lap, carved with spiral patterns that shimmered faintly in the fading light. It took me a moment to process what I was seeing. He was one of them, a Navaari, the very same people the village elders warned us about, the ones we were told to avoid, to fear. But I couldn't turn away. I slowly stepped forward, my feet hesitant in the cool water as I approached the figure. My heart hammered in my chest, and for a moment I considered walking away. No one would blame me if I did. He was far from his people, and my life would be so much simpler if I simply ignored him. But something about his quiet suffering struck me. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, a desire to do what I knew was right, even when the world around me told me not to. "You're a long way from your people," I called out, my voice tentative. The Navaari elder's head turned, amber eyes locking onto mine. "As are you?" he asked, his voice smooth but heavy with years of wisdom and pain. I swallowed, stepping closer, keeping a safe distance. The tension in the air was thick, and I could feel it in my gut. "You need to get across?" I asked, nodding toward the river that separated us. The Navaari nodded, his voice breaking slightly. "My village lies beyond those trees. I was gathering medicinal roots when my old injury flared. The current," he gestured weakly toward the rushing water. "It has grown too strong for my weakened state." I hesitated. The current was violent, more than it should have been for this time of year. The sensible choice was to fill my jug and leave, to do nothing. I had no reason to help him. He was from another world, another culture, one that had only ever viewed humans as outsiders, as threats. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was my chance to do something that mattered, to be more than just another orphan fighting for survival. I stepped forward, the words coming from my mouth before I could stop them. "Let me help you cross the river, sir," I said, surprising myself with my own voice. His eyes studied me carefully, as though measuring the sincerity in my words. For a long moment there was silence. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I am Thor," he said, his voice deep but grateful. "Jacob," I replied, my voice small against the weight of the moment. With careful movements, I helped him to his feet. Despite his size, he was surprisingly light, almost frail. I supported his weight as we approached the river's edge. The current roared around us, pulling at our legs, threatening to knock us off balance. But I steadied myself, focusing on the path I knew well, stones hidden just beneath the surface, a path I had walked 1,000 times. "Step exactly where I step," I said, my voice firm. We waded into the cold water, the current fighting us with every step. Thor's weight dragged on me, and I could feel my muscles burning as I struggled to maintain our balance. Each time the current pulled at us, I had to dig in my feet, resisting the pull of the water. My legs were shaking from the effort. "Why does a human boy help a Navaari elder?" Thor asked, his voice breaking the silence between us. I looked up at him, my focus on the next stone ahead. "Same reason anyone helps anyone, I guess, because someone should." He didn't answer, but his gaze lingered on me for a long moment. The water surged against us, the current fighting us like an animal trying to break free. But somehow, step by step, we made our way across. Halfway through, the worst happened. Thor slipped, his foot failing to find purchase on the slick stone beneath us. The current yanked at us, pulling both of us under. I had no choice but to lock my arm around his waist. Using every ounce of strength, I had to pull him back to solid ground. "Almost there," I grunted, the water freezing against my skin but my muscles burning. When we finally reached the other side, we collapsed onto a fallen log, both of us breathing hard, soaked to the bone. Thor smiled faintly, revealing sharp teeth that gleamed like polished ivory. "You have my gratitude, Jacob of Meridian," he said, his voice full of respect. "No need to thank me," I said, shrugging. "Just did what needed doing." Thor studied me for a long moment before reaching into his robe. He withdrew a small stone, smooth and warm to the touch. "Take this," he said, pressing the stone into my hand. "It may serve you well someday. Among my people it symbolizes a debt of honor." I closed my fingers around it, unsure of its meaning. "Thank you, but no debt is necessary." "Honor is always necessary, young one," Thor said with a soft smile before he rose with surprising agility and began limping toward the trees. "Until we meet again." I watched him disappear into the forest, feeling the weight of the stone in my pocket. For a moment, I simply sat there, trying to process everything that had just happened. What had I done? And why did it feel like something more than just helping an old man cross a river? Little did I know, my life was about to change forever. The sun had barely risen the next morning when I heard the knock at my door. At first, I thought I was imagining it, the kind of groggy sensation you get when you've only just woken up from a restless night. But the knock came again, louder this time. I groggily pulled on my shirt and stumbled to the door, trying to shake the fog from my mind. If it was about the water tax again, I wasn't interested. I'd told Magistrate Holt 100 times that I couldn't afford it. But when I opened the door, it wasn't the tax collector standing there. Instead, I found myself staring at a group of Navaari. I blinked, rubbing my eyes as though this was some kind of dream, but they remained. At the front of the group, leaning less heavily on his staff than before, stood Thor, the same elder I had helped across the river only the day before. His amber eyes held an amused gleam as he regarded me, almost as if he were enjoying the surprise on my face. "Good morning, Jacob of Meridian," Thor said, his voice formal and deep. I stood there, frozen for a moment, unsure how to respond. My hands were still shaking slightly from the memory of last night, from helping him cross the river. My mind couldn't quite catch up with the situation at hand. Good morning," I stammered, stepping back to let them in. The group behind Thor consisted of several other Navaari, their eyes filled with curiosity, studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Thor didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped inside with the others, his eyes scanning my small, cramped hut as he moved past me. I couldn't help but notice the way his gaze lingered on the walls, on the bare wood, the dust that covered the corners. The stark difference between the warmth of their village and my humble home was obvious, but none of that mattered now. They were here for something else. "We hope we do not disturb your rest," Thor continued. "It is customary among our people to honor debts promptly." Before I could even ask what this was about, a female Navaari stepped forward. She was beautiful, with skin a shade lighter than Thor's, almost luminescent in the morning sunlight that filtered through the cracks in the walls. Her silver hair cascaded down her back in waves, decorated with iridescent beads that caught the light, and her piercing blue eyes met mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "This is my granddaughter, Lazana," Thor introduced her, his voice carrying a proud note. Lazana stepped forward with a fluid grace that seemed almost unreal, her eyes never leaving mine. "Your kindness to my grandfather has honored our family," she said, her voice melodic, almost musical. "Few humans would have done what you did." I opened my mouth to protest, to say something humble or dismissive, but the words stuck in my throat. The way she spoke, it wasn't just gratitude. It was something more, something deeper that I couldn't quite grasp. "No, anyone would have helped," I said almost too quickly, but she shook her head with a smile playing on her lips. "No," she said softly, "they would not." Her eyes, so intense and unblinking, made my heart race. "That is why you are different." I looked down at my feet, my cheeks burning as her gaze lingered on me. I wasn't used to this, being looked at this way. I was just a boy, just an orphan who had learned to survive alone, but something about Lazana made me feel like I was more, like I was part of something larger than myself. Thor cleared his throat, his voice breaking the moment between us. "The Council of Elders has extended an invitation," he said, his tone now more serious. "We would be honored if you would visit our healing springs. The waters there may ease the burden of your hard life." I blinked, my mind struggling to process what he was saying. A human, invited to Navaari territory. It didn't make sense. We were enemies, weren't we? Humans and Navaari had always been separated by a border. The village of Meridian was a place of tension, the last human settlement before the vast lands claimed by the Navaari tribes. Relations were not great. "I'm not sure," I said, my voice uncertain. "Your people and mine don't exactly get along." Lazana's smile faltered slightly, but she didn't seem surprised by my hesitation. "Perhaps it is time that changed," she said softly, "starting with those who are willing to see beyond old prejudices." I hesitated again, torn between what I knew and what was being offered to me. The Navaari had never invited a human to their territory in my lifetime. To them, we were nothing more than outsiders. To be invited to their sacred place was overwhelming. "When would we go?" I asked, the words coming out before I could stop myself. Lazana's eyes sparkled. "Now, if you are willing," she said. "The journey is not long and you would return by nightfall." I glanced back at my humble home, at the small pile of belongings I had left from my family. There was nothing keeping me here, no family, no obligations. "All right," I said, swallowing hard. "Let me grab my things." Minutes later, we were walking along a hidden trail through the forest. Thor led the way, his slow but steady pace guiding us through the trees. Lazana walked beside me, her presence so close I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the sound of our footsteps was the only noise that filled the silence between us. As we walked, Lazana spoke to me softly, asking about my life in Meridian. I told her as much as I could without revealing too much, about the raiders who had killed my parents, about how I had learned to survive on my own. But somehow, with her, it felt easier to speak. She listened with such attentiveness that it was as if she understood the weight of my words without needing to hear them all. "You are different," she said after a while, her voice quiet. "Most humans are afraid of our people. They see only what they want to see. But you saw my grandfather for what he was, a soul in need of help." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. Her words made me feel strange, uncomfortable, but not in a bad way. We continued through the forest until we arrived at a clearing, where a series of terrace pools lay nestled in the earth. The water shimmered with an ethereal blue-green light, glowing softly in the early morning light. "This is our sacred place," Thor said, his voice full of reverence. "The healing springs of the Navaari." I stood there for a moment, stunned by the beauty of the place. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. The water shimmered with an otherworldly light, and the air was filled with a sense of peace that I hadn't realized I needed until that very moment. Lazana turned to me, her expression serious. "The springs can heal the body, but sometimes it is the spirit that needs healing most." I didn't understand what she meant, but somehow I knew that I was standing at the edge of something larger than myself. This was the moment where everything changed. The river of change was no longer just a place in the world. It was the river of my life, and it was about to carry me into a new world, one I had never imagined. The sun was high in the sky by the time we reached the center of the Navaari's sacred grounds. The air here was thick with an almost tangible sense of history, as though the very earth beneath our feet had absorbed centuries of wisdom. The pools of water gleamed in the sunlight, casting shimmering reflections on the rocks and trees surrounding us. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the scene before me, unsure of how I had ended up in this moment. Lazana walked beside me, her presence like a whisper in the wind. The silence between us was different now, charged with something I couldn't place, but it was there, thick and unspoken. Thor led us further into the complex, his gait slower now but still purposeful. As we passed the lower pools, I noticed several other Navaari, elderly figures bathing in the warm water, their skin glowing as the steam rose in delicate tendrils. The air smelled of minerals and fresh water, tinged with the fragrance of wild herbs growing along the edges of the pools. It was surreal, standing among them, feeling like an outsider, yet also somehow a part of this sacred space. I was just a boy from a small village, someone who had been taught to fear these people, to distrust them. Yet here I was, invited to witness their most revered ritual, their most private ceremony. "We are honored by your presence, Jacob," Thor said, his voice as calm and steady as always. "The elders have agreed to meet with you." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The enormity of the situation settled in my chest like a stone, heavy and unmoving. But something deeper stirred in me, something that had been building since I'd helped Thor across the river. A quiet longing to belong somewhere, to be seen for who I truly was. I had spent so many years fighting just to survive, never once thinking that there could be something more for me, something outside of this endless cycle of hardship. Lazana's soft voice interrupted my thoughts. "The council is waiting." She gestured toward a group of Navaari gathered near a large stone structure, the high priestesses among them, their silver hair flowing like a river of moonlight. Their gazes turned toward us as we approached, but their expressions were unreadable. As we neared, I noticed something in their eyes that made my pulse quicken. They were watching me, studying me as though they could see straight through me. It was a kind of scrutiny I had never known. The elders were not just looking at me as a human boy. No, they were looking at me as something more. "Jacob of Meridian," one of the elders spoke, her voice soft yet commanding. She was tall, her skin a deep shade of blue, and her eyes, amber like Thor's, seemed to glow with an ancient power. "You have come a long way to be here. Tell us, why do you seek the healing of our springs?" I hesitated. What could I say? That I was here because I had helped an old man across a river, that my life had been filled with more loss than I could bear, that I wasn't sure who I was or what I was meant to be. "I didn't come here seeking healing," I said finally, my voice steady despite the knot in my throat. "I came because it was the right thing to do. My people, humans, have been divided from the Navaari for as long as I can remember, but it doesn't have to be that way." Lazana stepped forward, her eyes locked on the council. "Jacob speaks the truth," she said, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "Perhaps it is time to bridge the divide between our peoples." The room fell into a tense silence. The elders exchanged looks, their eyes narrowing as they studied us both. I could feel the weight of their gaze, and for the first time I understood what it meant to be judged, not just for who you were, but for what you represented. Then a voice broke through the silence, harsh and full of disdain. "A human standing among us as if he is one of our own." The voice came from a tall, lean Navaari standing at the edge of the circle, his dark blue skin contrasting sharply with the light of the pools. His expression was cold, his eyes filled with judgment. "This is blasphemy. How dare you allow this human to be present at our most sacred ceremony?" I flinched at the words, the sharpness of them cutting through me like a blade. Lazana's hand found mine, her fingers cool against my warm skin, but I could feel the tension in her grip. "This human helped my grandfather," she said, her voice steady despite the challenge. "And that is more than I can say for many of our own people." The Navaari man sneered, his lip curling in disdain. "And what does that matter? You forgot your place, Lazana. He is not one of us. He does not belong here." The air seemed to crackle with the energy of their words, each one a sharp strike against the fragile connection we were trying to build. My heart raced, my mind spinning. I knew I wasn't welcome here, knew that no matter what I did, I would never be fully accepted by the Navaari. But something in me refused to let it go. Something in me pushed me to stand tall, to rise above the tension, the accusations. "I may not belong here," I said, my voice steady, "but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to learn, and if that's wrong, then I don't know what else to do." Lazana stepped closer to me, her eyes fierce now, her voice unwavering. "We cannot move forward if we continue to hold onto old grudges. It is time to let go." The room was silent for a moment, the tension thick in the air. I could feel the weight of their stares on me, the skepticism, the disbelief. But then, slowly, the elder with amber eyes, Thor's granddaughter, Lazana, stepped forward. "We will allow this," she said, her voice calm yet powerful. "But there will be a test. If you are truly worthy of being here, worthy of bridging the divide between our peoples, then you will face what lies ahead." I nodded, my heart racing. A test. A challenge I wasn't sure I was ready for. But in that moment I understood something I hadn't before. The road ahead would not be easy. It would be full of obstacles, of judgment, of fear. But if I was going to change anything, if I was going to make a real difference, I had to prove that I was more than just a boy from a broken village. I had to prove that I belonged here, among the Navaari. The ceremony was scheduled for the following evening, after the sun had set, when the moonlight would cast its cool glow on the sacred pools. As the day wore on, I found myself walking alongside Lazana through the forest again, the weight of the elders' expectations heavy on my shoulders. The Navaari had given me a ceremonial robe to wear, an intricate garment woven with fine threads that shimmered in the light, but felt like an anchor, as though it held the weight of centuries upon its fabric. It made me feel out of place, like a human in a world that wasn't meant for me. Lazana was quiet beside me, her gaze always slightly ahead, as though she was deep in thought. I couldn't help but steal glances at her. Her silver hair caught the light of the dying day, her skin glowing faintly in the shadows of the forest. Every step she took seemed effortless, graceful in a way I couldn't begin to replicate. Her beauty was not something that belonged to just this world. It felt like something ancient and untouchable. And yet she was standing right next to me, walking with me as though we were equals. "Are you nervous?" I asked, breaking the silence. She smiled faintly, her eyes flicking to mine for just a moment before returning to the path ahead. "I'm always nervous before the ceremony," she admitted. "The weight of tradition, of expectations, is not easy to bear." "Is that why you're not like the others?" I asked hesitantly. "Why you don't seem afraid to speak your mind?" Lazana's gaze softened. "I'm not afraid of what my people think," she said, her voice calm but laced with a hint of sadness. "But I am afraid of what happens if nothing ever changes. If we continue to let fear rule us, we'll never bridge the divide. We'll never understand each other." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy and powerful. I didn't know what to say. I had been raised to fear the Navaari, to see them as enemies, something foreign and dangerous. But Lazana made me feel like maybe we weren't all that different after all. We walked in silence for a while longer, until the sound of rushing water filled the air. We reached the river's edge just as the sky was beginning to turn dark, the stars starting to peek through the darkening canvas above. The river shimmered under the moonlight, its waters glowing faintly with a hue that reminded me of the healing pools in the distance. It was a strange feeling, standing on the banks of the river again, knowing how much had changed since I'd first crossed it. "Here we are," Lazana said quietly, motioning toward the water. "The river that separates our people." I stared at the flowing water, the same water I had crossed only days ago, but now it felt different. Now it was more than just a physical boundary. It was a symbol of everything that had divided us, the human world from the Navaari, the distrust, the fear, the ancient rifts. But if there was one thing I had learned since stepping foot on this land, it was that nothing was set in stone, not even the river. "We're going to be tested," I said suddenly, my voice low. "The council, they're going to test me." Lazana turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "But it's not just about you, Jacob. It's about all of us. If you can prove yourself worthy, then maybe there's hope. Hope that we can all learn to coexist, to move past the history that has shaped us." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," I admitted. "I'm just a boy, a human boy. Why would they trust me?" Lazana took a step closer, her cool fingers brushing against my warm hand. "Because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything," she said softly. "And you, Jacob, have shown more courage than anyone I know." Before I could respond, a distant sound broke the silence, an eerie, shrill whistle cutting through the stillness of the night. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. It was a sound I'd never heard before, but one that filled me with dread. Lazana's eyes widened and she stepped closer to me, her hand tightening around mine. "We're not alone," she whispered. My pulse quickened. I could hear the rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs underfoot, and the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps approaching us from the shadows. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Lazana didn't answer immediately. She scanned the trees with a look of alarm before pulling me back into the cover of the forest. Her grip on my hand tightened, her eyes filled with urgency. "Stay close to me," she said, her voice low and tense. "This isn't good." Just then, figures emerged from the shadows, tall, dark figures with cold eyes. They were wearing armor made from the dark, scaly hides of some unknown creature, and their faces were obscured by heavy, intricate masks. Their movements were precise, almost predatory. Lazana pulled me further back, but I could feel the tension rising, the air thick with an impending sense of danger. These weren't the Navaari I had met. These were something different, something hostile. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They are the Krell faction," Lazana said, her voice sharp. "A group of Navaari who believe in the purity of our bloodline. They do not welcome outsiders, and they certainly do not want the prophecy fulfilled. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. The Krell faction, those who opposed the unity of our peoples, the ones who would do anything to prevent the change I had come here to foster. One of the Krell stepped forward, his voice cold and cutting through the night air. "You think you can change the way of things, boy?" He spat, his voice filled with disdain. "You're nothing but a pawn in their game. You will never bridge the divide between our peoples. You are not one of us, and you will never be." Lazana stepped forward, her eyes narrowed with defiance. "You are wrong," she said, her voice strong. "Jacob has already done what none of you could. He helped my grandfather, and he will help all of us." The Krell laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in the night. "We will see about that," he sneered. Suddenly, the air seemed to crackle with energy, and I felt a surge of heat radiating from the stone in my pocket. It pulsed, responding to the tension in the air. The ground beneath us seemed to shift, and I could feel the weight of the moment, the weight of the prophecy, of the change that had already begun. Before I could understand what was happening, the Krell drew weapons, long, curved blades that gleamed in the moonlight. My heart raced, and I knew with a cold certainty that I wasn't just standing in the middle of a simple ceremony anymore. This was no longer about proving myself to the elders. This was about survival, and it was about to get a lot worse. The battle was quick, brutal, and over almost before it began. The Krell's blades gleamed under the moonlight as they lunged toward us, their eyes filled with a dangerous intensity. I could hear the scrape of steel against metal, the harsh clashing of weapons in the night air, but none of that mattered. I was more focused on the sudden surge of energy that exploded from the stone in my pocket. It burned against my skin, pulsing with a light that seemed to reach into my very bones. The power was overwhelming, like a river of heat coursing through me, pushing me forward. I didn't know what I was doing or how I was doing it. All I knew was that I had to protect myself and Lazana. I didn't have time to think before one of the Krell came at me, his sword raised high. My heart was pounding in my chest as I instinctively threw my arm out, the stone glowing in my hand. And just like that, everything changed. A pulse of energy erupted from the stone, so powerful that it sent the Krell man flying backward, crashing into the trees behind him. The impact was like thunder, loud, jarring, and sudden. The other Krells stopped in their tracks, staring at me as though I had become something they couldn't comprehend. Lazana, wide-eyed and breathless, stepped closer to me, her fingers still clutching mine. "Jacob," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ringing in my ears. "What did you just do?" I stared at my hand, still gripping the stone. The glow had faded, but the warmth still lingered in my palm. I couldn't explain what had just happened. It felt like the stone had reacted to me, like it had done something that I hadn't even known it was capable of. The Krell, stunned but not defeated, slowly began to regroup. But the fear in their eyes was unmistakable. They weren't just facing a human anymore, they were facing something they didn't understand. "Enough," a voice rang out from behind them. The Krell leader stepped forward, his posture rigid, his face hidden behind a mask. "You will regret this, human. You think you can stand against us." I didn't say a word, I didn't have to. The stone was still warm in my hand, its power coursing through me, and I could feel something stirring within me. A resolve, a determination to stand my ground. But before the situation could escalate further, Thor appeared, limping through the trees with surprising speed, his amber eyes locked on the Krell leader. Behind him, the rest of the Navaari elders were gathered, their expressions grim, their weapons drawn. They had come. "This is not your fight, Krell," Thor said, his voice calm yet commanding. "You have no place here." The Krell leader sneered beneath his mask. "We do not recognize your authority, Thor," he spat. "You are a relic of the past, we are the future." Thor raised his staff, its spiral carvings glowing faintly in the moonlight. "The past is never truly gone, Krell. It is simply waiting to be remembered." With a signal, the Navaari warriors moved into position, surrounding the Krell in a tight circle. The tension in the air was palpable, and for a moment, it seemed as though the forest itself held its breath. And then, without warning, the Krell leader backed down. "We will not forget this," he muttered, his voice dripping with venom. "This is not over, human." With that, the Krell retreated into the forest, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. The Navaari warriors watched them go, their stances still guarded, but there was a sense of relief in the air. The immediate danger had passed, for now. Lazana's grip on my hand relaxed, and she let out a slow, shaky breath. That was close. I couldn't find the words to respond. I was still reeling from what had just happened. The pulse of energy, the stone's power, the sheer force of it all. It had all happened so quickly that my mind hadn't caught up with what my body had just done. Thor stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You have done well, Jacob of Meridian," he said, his voice steady, "but you have only just begun to walk the path that lies before you." I swallowed hard, trying to calm my racing heart. "I don't understand," I admitted. "What just happened?" Thor's gaze softened slightly. "The stone you carry is not merely an object, Jacob. It is a key to an ancient power that has been waiting for the right moment to awaken. That moment is now. You are more than just a human boy. You are the one the prophecy spoke of." I felt a chill run down my spine. "A prophecy?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Lazana stepped forward, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. "Yes," she said softly. "You are the bridge between our peoples, the one who will unite us, but it is not an easy path. There will be many who will stand against you." I couldn't process it. The idea that I, just a boy who had survived by his wits, was somehow the key to bridging the divide between humans and Navaari seemed impossible. But everything that had happened since I met Thor, everything that had led me here, felt like it was meant to be. I glanced down at the stone in my hand again, its warmth fading, but the weight of it remained. Thor placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm but not unkind. "You have the strength, Jacob. It is in you. But you must learn to harness it. It is a power that will test you, that will challenge everything you believe, and it will not be easy." The tension in my chest only deepened, but something in me stirred, something that made me realize I had no choice. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about the future. "I will do whatever it takes," I said, my voice steady, my resolve growing stronger with each passing second. "I won't back down." Thor nodded slowly, the faintest trace of approval in his eyes. "Good," he said. "Then let us return to the village. There is much more to be done." As we made our way back through the forest, I couldn't help but wonder what would come next. The Krell were not the only threat we would face. There were others, those who feared change, who wanted to keep the divide between our peoples. But I couldn't let that stop me, not now. I had already crossed the river. I had already taken the first step, and there was no turning back. The days that followed felt like an endless whirlwind, one that I could barely keep up with. Thor and Lazana led me deeper into the heart of the Navaari lands, to a place that seemed untouched by the wars, the struggles, and the hate that had torn our worlds apart for centuries. I felt out of place among the Navaari, but I couldn't deny the growing sense that I was meant to be here. I had come to their world as an outsider, but now, with each passing day, I was beginning to feel like I was becoming something more. But even as I tried to embrace the new reality of my life, something was gnawing at me, something I couldn't ignore. The Krell faction had retreated, but I knew that they weren't the only obstacle standing in the way of unity between humans and Navaari. No matter how hard I tried to push it away, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something darker waiting, something that could tear everything I had worked for apart. And I wasn't the only one who knew it. One evening, after a long day spent among the Navaari elders, we sat around a campfire near the healing springs. Thor had shared stories of their people, their history, and their struggle for survival against the Saurians, an ancient enemy that had long threatened both humans and Navaari alike. I had listened intently, trying to understand, but my thoughts kept returning to what Lazana had said to me when we first met. "You are the bridge between our peoples." It was a burden that weighed heavily on me now, one that I wasn't sure I was ready for. Lazana sat beside me, her eyes filled with quiet intensity as she watched the fire dance in front of us. I could feel the pull between us, that same connection that had been there from the very beginning. It was as if the very air between us was charged with something unspoken, something that neither of us could ignore. "You're quiet tonight," Lazana said, her voice soft, her eyes turning to me. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated, the weight of my thoughts pressing against me. The truth was I was scared, scared of what was coming, scared of the responsibilities I was carrying now, and scared of what my people, humans, might think if they found out that I had chosen to stand with the Navaari. "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I'm ready to be the one who bridges our worlds. What if I fail? What if I can't change things? What if I'm not enough?" Lazana reached out, her fingers brushing against mine. "You're more than enough," she said, her voice unwavering. "You have already done what most would never dare to do. You've proven that you're willing to try, and that is what matters. It's not about being perfect, Jacob. It's about doing what is right." Her words should have been comforting, but they only made the knot in my stomach tighten. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that I could be the one to change everything. But the fear lingered, gnawing at me. Suddenly, a shadow loomed over us, blocking the light of the fire. I looked up, my heart skipping a beat. It was Thor, his expression serious, his eyes filled with concern. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. Lazana looked at him, then at me, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What's wrong?" Thor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he motioned for us to follow him. The tone in his voice was enough to make my stomach twist with unease. Something had changed. Something had shifted. We followed him in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. We didn't stop until we reached a small, secluded clearing just beyond the healing springs. The night air was cool against my skin, but the tension between us made it feel colder than it really was. "I've been watching," Thor said, his eyes never leaving mine. "And I've been listening. There are things you don't know about our people, Jacob, about the history we share with humans, things that are buried deep, things that are not easily spoken." I felt my breath catch in my throat. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice shaky. Thor took a step closer, his gaze intense. "There is a reason the Krell faction is so opposed to our alliance with humans, a reason they will stop at nothing to prevent this prophecy from being fulfilled. It's not just about pride, it's about something much darker." Lazana's face paled, her eyes widening in realization. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thor paused for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "Centuries ago, long before humans and Navaari were divided by this river, our peoples lived together. We were one. But a betrayal occurred, a betrayal so deep that it split us apart. The Navaari royal bloodline was tainted by a human. That human was the ancestor of your family, Jacob." I froze. The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. What?" I stammered, my voice barely audible. I don't understand. My family, my parents." Thor's expression softened, but his eyes remained hard. "The bloodlines of your ancestors run through you, Jacob. You are a descendant of the first human who betrayed the Navaari. His actions led to the division between our people, and the Krell faction will never allow a descendant of that bloodline to unite us." My mind reeled as the weight of his words settled on me. Betrayal. My family was tied to the very reason for the war between humans and Navaari. Lazana's hand found mine again, her grip tight, grounding me. "Jacob," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You are not your ancestors, you are not what they did, you are your own person." But it didn't feel that way. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. My blood was the blood of a traitor, and no matter how much I wanted to believe that I could change things, I couldn't escape the past that ran through my veins. "There is more," Thor continued, his voice low. "The Krell faction knows what you are. They have known since the day you crossed the river. That is why they tried to stop you. They see you as a threat, a reminder of the betrayal that divided us." I felt sick to my stomach. All this time I had thought I was helping. But now I realized that I wasn't just bridging the gap between two worlds. I was carrying the weight of that gap. And no matter how much I wanted to deny it, no matter how much I tried to stand for something different, I couldn't escape the legacy that had been passed down to me. I turned to Lazana, her face filled with concern. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice cracking. "How do I face them? How do I face myself?" She stepped forward, her eyes never leaving mine. "You face it head-on, you don't hide from the past, you acknowledge it, and you choose to be different. You choose to be the change, Jacob. You are not your ancestors." But as I stood there, staring into her eyes, I realized that the truth, my truth, wasn't as simple as it seemed. I had to confront the past, confront the betrayal that had shaped my bloodline, and I had to decide if I was strong enough to change everything. But in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. The weight of the truth sat heavy on my chest, suffocating me, filling every corner of my mind with doubt. For days, I couldn't shake the revelation that had torn through everything I thought I knew. I was the descendant of a traitor. My ancestors' betrayal had split the Navaari and human worlds apart, and now I was being asked to be the bridge that would heal that divide. The idea was laughable. It was a cruel joke, and I couldn't decide if I was the punchline or the victim. How could I be the one to unite two peoples when my very bloodline was the cause of their division? Days passed in a blur. The Navaari elders continued their ceremonies, their efforts to bring unity and peace to their people, while I spiraled inward, consumed by my own confusion and shame. Lazana was there, always by my side, trying to offer comfort, but I felt like I was losing myself. It wasn't until one night, when the wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth, that I finally understood what I had to do. The healing springs, which had once felt like a symbol of hope, now seemed like a cruel reminder of the walls I could never tear down. But they were also the place where I had to face the truth, to stand before it, and allow it to change me. I walked alone to the springs, the night air cool against my skin, the sky above filled with stars that seemed to mock my every step. As I reached the water's edge, I stared at my reflection. The boy who stood there was no longer the same boy who had crossed the river days ago. He was someone changed, someone who had seen too much and understood too little. "You're not just a boy, Jacob," I whispered to myself, my voice trembling in the silence. "You're more than that, and you have to be." The stone in my pocket, once warm with power, now pulsed faintly. It was as if it, too, understood the burden I carried. I held it in my hand, feeling its weight, feeling its promise and its danger. The moment I touched the stone, something happened. The river seemed to shift before my eyes as though the very flow of water had changed course, its current slowing and then surging with an energy I could not understand. The stone flared, and I felt the power surging through me once again like a pulse, a heartbeat that connected me to something much larger than myself. Suddenly Thor appeared from the shadows, his amber eyes fixed on me with a knowing gaze. "You've come to face it, haven't you?" he asked, his voice deep, filled with understanding. I nodded slowly, my throat tight. "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted, the words escaping me before I could stop them. "I'm not what they need. I'm not the hero they think I am." Thor stepped forward, his gaze never wavering. "No one is born a hero, Jacob, not even the greatest of us. We are shaped by the choices we make. And right now you are choosing to face the truth. That is more than enough." I shook my head, still unable to fully grasp the weight of his words. "I'm not strong enough." Thor's voice softened. "Strength isn't about power, Jacob. It's about doing what is right, no matter how difficult. Strength is about owning your mistakes, understanding your past, and choosing to change the future." For the first time, I saw the depth of wisdom in Thor's eyes. I had come to this land expecting to find answers, but what I hadn't realized was that the answers weren't external. They were within me. I had been running from my past, from the shame of what my family had done, but it was only when I stopped running, when I acknowledged that past, that I could truly begin to move forward. "I am my own person," I said, the words firm now. "I'm not my ancestors, and I won't let their mistakes define me." Thor smiled, the kind of smile that reached deep into his eyes. "That's the spirit," he said. "Now you are ready." I took a deep breath, stepping into the water, the cool liquid swirling around my legs. The power of the stone pulsed stronger, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. I could feel it connecting me to the river, to the very earth beneath my feet. In that moment, I understood. The river was more than just a physical divide between our people. It was a symbol. It was a metaphor for everything that separated us: fear, hatred, misunderstanding. But it was also the path forward. The river could divide us, but it could also connect us. It was never too late to change the flow. And with that realization came a wave of clarity. I stood tall, the weight of the stone in my hand, and I made a decision. The bridge between our peoples wouldn't be built by force or by power. It would be built by truth, by honesty, by owning the past and choosing to change the future. I couldn't change my bloodline, but I could change how I used it. I could choose to fight for something better. With one final, steady breath, I whispered into the still night, "I am ready." The stone pulsed in my hand, the river's flow shifting beneath me, as though it too was ready to carry me forward. And with that, I felt a calm settle over me, a peace that I hadn't known I needed. The weight of the past no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a lesson, one that had been passed down through generations, one that had shaped me into the person I was meant to be. As I turned back to the campfire, where Lazana was waiting, her face a mix of concern and hope, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't do this alone. But with the right people by my side, we could change everything. Together, we could heal the divide, bridge the gap, and rewrite the story of our peoples. And that was just the beginning.